Anna rushed out of the house, her trembling hands clutching tightly at her thin coat. The cold wind howled across the fields, but nothing could stop her from running straight toward the barn. The thick darkness blanketed everything around her, with only the faint glow of the lantern hanging outside the barn, casting light like a distant beacon, calling her closer. She halted in front of the heavy wooden door, her heart pounding so violently it felt as if it would burst from her chest. Inside, the soft but deliberate sound of hooves shuffling echoed, as if the horse was waiting for her, or perhaps already knew she was coming. Anna pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges slicing through the suffocating silence. Stellan stood there, tall and majestic, his deep black eyes staring directly at her. She swallowed hard, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the horse. The air in the barn felt heavy, as if every breath and every movement carried a significance she couldn't quite explain. "You were waiting for me, weren't you?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper, soft like a confession. Stellan tilted his head slightly, a small gesture that felt like an answer. There was something in his gaze, a profound understanding, a wordless whisper that held Anna frozen in place, unable to look away. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly heard, in a way she never had with Lucas. A powerful surge of emotion coursed through her, both comforting and perilous. She reached out, her hand brushing against Stellan's mane, feeling the warmth of his body seep into her fingertips. It was like an electric current running down her spine, and in that moment, she realized her life had irreversibly changed. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but Anna no longer noticed. Everything else around her faded into silence. There was only her, Stellan, and a burgeoning secret, threading its way through the shadows like a flame poised to ignite. Anna stood still in the barn, her hand resting gently on Stellan's mane, her gaze lost in the distant void. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the scent of dry hay, damp earth, and the warm breath of the horse standing silently beside her. In this tranquil space, she felt as though she had escaped it all, the cold, lifeless house, Lucas's vacant stares, and the gnawing loneliness that had eaten away at her soul for years. Memories rushed over her like a tidal wave. There had been a time when Anna believed love could conquer everything. She and Lucas were once like blazing flames, unstoppable and inseparable. She remembered the first time they met, how Lucas had made her laugh until tears streamed down her face with his wit and natural charm. She recalled the long evenings spent by the fire, sharing dreams of a bright future. Back then, Lucas had promised he would always be by her side, building a life together that they could both cherish. But those promises had become a luxury as the years passed. Lucas had thrown himself into his work, endless meetings and business trips that stretched so long, Anna could no longer remember the last time they had dinner together without his phone buzzing incessantly. Every time he came home, it was like hosting a stranger. He'd walk in, drop his bag, give her a quick hug, and disappear behind the screen of his laptop. Anna had tried, really tried, to hold on. She had prepared romantic dinners, tried to revive their old conversations, but Lucas always dismissed her with the same weary refrain. "I'm too tired, Anna. Can we talk later?" But later never came. She used to believe that time could heal everything, but instead it only widened the chasm between them. Lucas wasn't a bad man. He wasn't unfaithful, angry, or neglectful in the conventional sense. But his indifference had made Anna feel like she was slowly fading, becoming a ghost in her own marriage. When Lucas bought Stellan, she thought it was just another fleeting interest of his. But Stellan had become the only bright spot in Anna's otherwise monotonous days. In the horse's deep, soulful eyes, she found a peace she hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't just that. Anna couldn't forget the first time she met Evelyn, the horse trainer Lucas had hired. Evelyn was a formidable woman, with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through every facade and an air of quiet sorrow that hinted at her own wounds. Evelyn didn't speak much, but when she did, her words hit like arrows, straight to truths Anna had long avoided. She remembered that afternoon when she and Evelyn stood outside the barn, talking about Stellan. Evelyn had looked directly at her, her gaze as though peeling back every layer of Anna's soul, and said a sentence Anna would never forget. You know, horses like Stellan can sense what humans refuse to admit. Sometimes it's loneliness that forges the strongest bond. At the time, Anna had only smiled politely and brushed it off. But now, as she stood before Stellan, Evelyn's words echoed in her mind like a prophecy. She didn't want to acknowledge it, but perhaps Evelyn had been right. It was her loneliness, the emptiness Lucas couldn't fill, that had slowly drawn her closer to Stellan, step by step. She ran her hand softly through Stellan's mane, feeling the warmth beneath her palm. You know, Stellan, she whispered, sometimes I wish I could be a horse like you. No worries, no battles to fight, just freedom. Stellan didn't answer, of course, but his gaze seemed to say he understood. And in that moment, Anna felt a fleeting sense of relief. Yet deep down, she knew everything was changing, and there was no way to turn back. The moonlight stretched across the fields, illuminating the narrow path leading to the barn. Anna walked slowly, step by step, as though an invisible force was pulling her towards Stellan. The wind grew stronger, colder, but she didn't care. Something inside her was stirring, a tempest both vague and overwhelming, as if her heart was urging her towards something her mind couldn't comprehend. The barn door creaked open, the hinges groaning into the stillness of the night. Stellan stood there, his deep, shadowy eyes reflecting the moonlight. In that moment, Anna felt the world around her dissolve. Lucas was gone. The cold, distant phone calls and the lonely, endless evenings had vanished. There was only her and Stellan, as though they belonged to each other in a way that required no explanation. You were waiting for me again, weren't you? She whispered, her own voice sounding like a stolen secret. She stepped closer, her hand brushing gently against Stellan's sleek black mane. The horse's warm breath puffed softly against her, soothing and silent, like a quiet reassurance. She stroked him, letting her fingers glide over the smooth strands of his coat. The weight in her chest seemed to lift, replaced by a calm so rare it almost felt foreign. But then, the moment shifted. Anna couldn't recall what made her do it. Perhaps it was the way Stellan's eyes held hers, or the slight tilt of his head that seemed to acknowledge her touch. Perhaps it was the storm inside her, the loneliness, the yearning, and the hollow void she had been unable to fill. Her hand stopped on the side of his face, her palm pressed gently against his warmth. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. But even that breath trembled. Stellan. His name slipped from her lips, not as a call, but as a confession. The horse shifted slightly, lowering his head as if in response. The way he stood, motionless yet full of understanding, made Anna feel as though he could read the very thoughts swirling in her mind. His gaze met hers, deep, unjudging, and demanding nothing, yet so magnetic she couldn't look away. Her breathing grew heavier. She moved closer, as though the space between them was an unbearable chasm that needed to be bridged. A long moment stretched between them, silent but thick with anticipation. Her hand came to rest on Stellan's chest, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart beneath her fingers. But her own heart was a chaotic drumbeat, threatening to shatter her composure. She stopped thinking. For the first time in her life, all reason, all notions of morality, and every voice of logic were silenced. She was left only with the rawness of her emotions, or perhaps a part of her she had repressed for far too long. One small step, a slight lean forward, and Anna's world came crashing down. She was no longer herself. She was no longer the tired, hollow version of Anna she had been. She was simply a woman consumed by feelings she had never known before. But then, a faint noise broke the spell. Anna jerked back, as if she had been yanked out of a fevered dream. A dim beam of light sliced through the barn, and her heart stopped in that instant. Evelyn stood in the doorway, the sharp-eyed horse trainer's gaze fixed on Anna like a dagger. She didn't say a word, But Anna knew. Evelyn had seen everything. The air in the barn felt frozen. Evelyn didn't move, her expression a mix of surprise and cold calculation, as though she was piecing together the scene she had just walked in on. Anna opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She could feel her breath rising in the cold night air like an unspoken confession. Shame, guilt, and fear pressed down on her chest, yet somewhere deep inside, she felt an odd sense of relief. Relief that finally, her secret was no longer hers alone to bear. "Anna." Evelyn's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. "What do you think you're doing?" The simple question cut through the air like a knife. Evelyn stepped into the barn, her movements slow but purposeful. Anna stumbled back, but Stellan stood unmoving like an anchor holding her in the eye of the storm. I don't know," Anna stammered, her voice weak and trembling. Evelyn stopped just a few feet from her, her sharp gaze boring into Anna's very soul. "Do you understand where this is heading?" Evelyn asked, her voice low but each word landing like a blow. "You're playing with fire, Anna, and once it burns, there will be nothing left to salvage." Anna couldn't respond. She simply stood there, face to face with Evelyn and the maelstrom of emotions tearing through her. She knew Evelyn was right. She knew the truth in those words. But even knowing that, she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she had already crossed a line she once thought she never would. Evelyn stood firmly before Anna, her gaze sharp as a blade. The suffocating tension in the barn thickened, pressing down on Anna until she felt like she couldn't breathe. She couldn't avoid Evelyn's eyes, couldn't deny what had just happened, and couldn't muster any excuse that might justify her actions. "Did you really think this would stay a secret, Anna?" Evelyn's voice was steady, yet brimming with restrained anger. "Did you think no one would notice the change in you? The difference in your eyes every time you walk out of this barn?" Anna took a step back, her hand clutching Stellan's mane as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. But Stellan, the horse she had once believed understood her better than anyone, now stood silent. No movement, no sound, just a presence, watching everything from an unreachable distance. I didn't mean to," Anna croaked, her voice hoarse. She knew her words carried no weight. She couldn't deny what Evelyn had seen, but she also couldn't articulate what she felt. This overpowering emotion, sweeping her away like a whirlwind she couldn't resist. "Didn't mean to?" Evelyn let out a short, sharp laugh, tinged with bitter irony. "Anna, this isn't something that just happened. This is a choice, and you know exactly what you're doing." Evelyn's words struck Anna like a blow to the chest, but instead of regret, she felt herself being pushed to the edge of a precipice. The storm inside her, shame, anger, and even a desperate longing, swelled, threatening to break free. "Why do you care?" Anna snapped, her voice louder than she intended, almost a shout. "This is my life. You have no idea what I've been through. You don't know how lonely I am." Evelyn's expression didn't waver. "You're right. I don't know everything," Evelyn replied, her tone quiet but heavy with meaning. "But I do know this. You're destroying yourself. And not just yourself, everyone around you." Anna felt exposed, stripped bare. She stood there, lost between Evelyn's cold, piercing gaze and the haunting silence of Stellan. Every justification, every excuse she had told herself now felt meaningless. She was just a woman trapped, consumed by feelings she couldn't control. "Lucas will never understand," Anna said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She turned her face away, her eyes catching the moonlight streaming through the cracks in the barn wall. "He's never understood me. Not really. And that's why you're doing this?" Evelyn stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to just a few steps. "Anna, I'm not here to judge you, but you need to understand. What you're doing won't bring you the freedom you think it will. It'll only make things worse." Anna wanted to argue, to yell that Evelyn didn't understand. But how could she deny the truth in Evelyn's words? How could she ignore the reality that she had crossed a line she could never uncross? A sudden noise broke through the tension, cutting through the silence like a blade. Anna froze, her head snapping toward the sound. The beam of a car's headlights swept across the field, slicing through the darkness like a razor. Lucas. Her heart seized, and she felt herself go cold, rooted in place. Evelyn glanced at Anna, her sharp gaze softening just slightly, a glimmer of strange sympathy flickering in her eyes. "You need to decide, Anna," Evelyn said, her voice quieter now, but no less resolute. "Right now. Either face what you've done or sink deeper into this mess." Anna's breathing quickened as Lucas's car drew closer, the headlights sweeping across the barn wall and illuminating her pale, stricken face. She had no idea what she would say or do. She only knew that every secret, every feeling she had buried, was now teetering on the brink of exposure. "Anna," Evelyn said one last time, her voice firm and unwavering. "This is your moment to choose, and only you can make that choice." Anna looked at Evelyn, then at Stellan, and finally back toward the approaching headlights. Her mind was a chaotic storm, but her heart pounded with a clarity that defied everything else, as if it were trying to guide her. In that moment she realized she had nowhere left to run. The headlights cut sharply through the darkness, illuminating the barn door and etching every detail of Anna's anxious face into stark clarity. She stood motionless, as if time itself had stopped. Evelyn took a step back, leaving space for Anna, though she didn't leave. Evelyn's sharp eyes, usually cold and unyielding, now held a quiet, watchful patience, as though she was waiting for Anna to make her final decision. The car came to a stop just outside the barn. Lucas stepped out, his tall frame casting a long shadow under the harsh glow of the headlights. The car door slammed shut with a dry thud, and silence reclaimed the air. He hesitated, scanning the area briefly before moving toward the barn. "Anna, are you in there?" Lucas called, his voice calm, just as it always was. But to Anna it sounded like thunder crashing in the still night. She turned toward him, their eyes meeting, and in an instant she realized he knew something. Maybe it wasn't clear, maybe it was only an instinctive feeling, but he knew. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice steadying as best as she could manage, though the tremor in her breath betrayed her. "I just wanted to check on Stellan." Lucas stepped into the barn, his eyes moving from Anna to Evelyn, who stood a few steps away, silent and still like a shadow. His brows furrowed slightly, his gaze shifting between the two women, picking up on the unspoken tension that hung heavy in the cramped space. "Is something going on?" he asked, his tone inquisitive, his eyes probing. Evelyn didn't answer. Anna knew she wouldn't. This was her moment to face the truth, to take responsibility for everything she had tried so desperately to bury. All eyes were on her now, and she felt as though every path had narrowed into a single point. She could lie again, prolong the suffocating burden of secrets and guilt. Or she could confront it all, the shame, the pain, and the vulnerability she had been so afraid to face. Her gaze flickered to Evelyn, whose expression, though calm, carried an unyielding challenge. Then to Lucas, whose eyes, though filled with worry, carried a glimmer of doubt she couldn't ignore. She knew she couldn't keep running. "Lucas," she began, her voice thick with emotion. I need to tell you something." Lucas froze, his eyes narrowing slightly in confusion. He didn't interrupt, didn't move, his gaze locked on hers. Evelyn turned her face slightly, stepping away as if to grant them privacy, though she didn't leave the barn. Anna took a deep breath, every word she wanted to say tangling in her throat. She thought of the moments she had lost herself, the times she had looked into Stellan's eyes and found the solace Lucas had never been able to give her. She thought of the yearning, the shame, the desperation, and she knew that if she didn't speak now, those feelings would imprison her forever. "I've felt so alone, Lucas," she said, her voice hoarse as tears began streaming down her cheeks. "I've felt it for so long, and I don't know how to escape it. Everything with you. everything between us. It feels like it's lost all meaning. Lucas didn't respond immediately. He stood there, his eyes searching hers, as though he were trying to extract the truth behind her words. "What are you saying, Anna?" His voice was low, and she could hear the weight in every syllable. "I've been looking for comfort in a place I shouldn't have," she continued, her voice catching in her throat. I've lost my way, Lucas. I don't know how to explain it, but I've crossed a line." Lucas stepped back, his eyes widening slightly as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Crossed a line," he repeated, his voice rough, barely audible. Anna felt her chest constrict, as if her heart were being squeezed by an invisible hand. "I don't know how to explain it," she said. "I just know that I've let myself go too far and I can't take it back." She braced herself for Lucas's anger, for him to yell or storm out. But he didn't. He just stood there, looking at her, his face a tangle of emotions she couldn't decipher. Finally he spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Do you still love me, Anna?" That simple question shattered what little defences she had left. Anna looked at him, tears streaming freely now. "I don't know, Lucas. I don't know anymore. But I want to find it again. I want to understand why we've become like this." Evelyn remained silent, but Anna could feel her presence, steady and unyielding, witnessing everything. Lucas turned away, stepping out of the barn without another word. His figure faded into the dim light of the car's headlights, leaving Anna standing there, emptier than she had ever felt. Evelyn approached her, her sharp eyes now softened with a strange gentleness. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Anna didn't respond. She turned toward Stellan, who still stood in the same spot, his deep, dark eyes watching her as if they held all the answers she couldn't find. She stepped closer, her hand running gently along his mane one last time. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. She had to leave the barn, leave the shadows she had allowed herself to sink into for so long. Outside, the moon continued to cast its cold glow, and in the chill of the night, Anna walked away, carrying with her all the pain, regret, and a flicker of hope that, maybe one day, she would find her way back to herself.